Good evening, everyone. We are taking a slight detour and we'll focus on Psalm 105 for the next few days. I'd like us to look at the Psalm because it gives us a different pace from the classes that we've had so far in the Torah. Psalm 105 does not have a heading, and we will want to understand where this psalm came from so that we have a better understanding of the background. As we begin, I would like to draw your attention to the purpose of the Psalms. They are Hebrew songs and they are written in a very Hebrew way to express truths, didactic instructions, but in a more poetic form. They are not like modern songs where sometimes the lyrics doesn't say very much, but every line in the Hebrew psalm bears a meaning. The Hebrew Bible is actually divided into three parts. The first five books of Moses is called the Torah, where it gives us all the mitzvot, the commands of God. Then comes the second part called the Nevi'im, the prophets. And with the prophets, God sends his prophets to rebuke the Israelites as to how they ought to remember what to do with regards to things which are not classed in the laws. Things like idolatry, things like Hamas, injustice, oppression of the poor, the needy, the fatherless, the widow, and violence done to people who can't help themselves. And the prophet books deal with those areas where God feels it's even more important than the offerings that they were to make to God. Then comes the last part of the Hebrew Bible called the writings. The lead of the writings, the Ketuvim, would be the Psalms. The writings guide the people to learn how to reconnect with God, how to repent, how to deal with their sins, how to relate to God. And that's a lot of writings, and those writings are to bring the people back to the correct posture with God. Today, when we look at Psalm 105, our first question that we need to ask is who wrote the psalm? Usually, we would have a title, but in this case, we don't. And in the past, I had suggested that whenever you have titles that says a psalm for David or a psalm regarding David, it would appear that someone had written the psalm to acknowledge and magnify the character and deeds of David. And it is not really written directly by David. Perhaps they learned about how David would have sung it, but it was not handwritten by David in that sense. However, in this psalm, Psalm 105, you would find that this is really a psalm written by David. Now, how do we know that? And we turn our attention to First Chronicles chapter 16. I draw your attention to First Chronicles chapter 16, and we begin reading from verse 7. It says, then on that day, David first put into the hand of Asaph and his relatives to give thanks to the Lord. And here we see this day is actually the event that is also recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 6. the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. It was a grand day. It was a magnificent day. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, we are not told very much, but later on in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, in verse 7, we're told, on that day in 2 Samuel 6, David had first assigned. Now, this word assign is to place in the hands of Asaph. Now, this is the, I guess you can call him the lead choir master and his relatives, and we would say that these would be the Levites together with them. Now, understanding in the book of First Chronicles, you find that the tribe of Levites has a very broad role with regards to the tabernacle and the temple in terms of worshiping of God. The priests, as we know, would lead all the functions of the sacrifices as people approach God. But when it comes to music, the choir master really is from the Levites, and the singers of the choir would also be from the Levites. And as we can tell from this particular psalm, it was David who placed into the hands of Asaph this psalm to give thanks to God. And with this, you find that in First Chronicles chapter 16, and starting from verse 8 all the way to verse 22, is found in Psalm 105, which we are going to read today, and at least in part. The second part of First Chronicles chapter 16 would be verses 23 to 33, and you find this in Psalm 96. As what I had suggested in the past, when a psalm has no particular reference to a person, it is highly likely that that psalm was handwritten by David, because it does not say that it's for David. But in this case, when David handwrites it, he doesn't put his name to the psalm. And that would be how I would see Psalm 105. It is definitely a psalm of David in the sense he wrote the psalm. Not somebody wrote the psalm, that the contents of the psalm is about David. And so we begin with Psalm 105. Given this background in First Chronicles chapter 16, verses 8 to 22, in a very large part in Psalm 105. Psalm 105, verse 1. It says, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make his deeds known among the peoples. We're going to spend some time going through the Hebrew, and so we will break Psalm 105 into three parts. As we begin in verse 1, it is to call attention to give thanks. This word here is horu, but it comes from the root word yara. Yara. And the word yara is really to point and to direct one's attention. It is also giving the idea of a confession as well as praise, as well as thankfulness. It is to point your attention to, in this case, Jehovah, the God of Israel. And so the translators have chosen this, give thanks to Jehovah. And it's a good way of expressing it, in fact. So it is to express thankfulness. Now, thankfulness is something that you ascribe to God in this case. It's like an idea of thanksgiving, to cause Jehovah to be known and to receive thanks. I think that would be a way of looking at this, to confess your sins as well as to direct your thankfulness to God. And this is a command. And so David begins the psalm by an imperative that all of you direct your attention to Jehovah and show your thankfulness to him. That's the first part. Now, the second part is to call upon his name. Now, or call in, or call into his name. Now, there is a meaning here. This word call is the word kara. And the word kara is also in the imperative. It is to cry out, and in particular in a loud voice or a loud sound, or to read aloud or to recite out. It is something that is audible. So this idea of call upon his name is really to to cry out to God in the thanksgiving, in the attention to all the people around with regards to Jehovah. Now, please bear in mind, Jehovah is the name of God. Now, obviously, today, the Jews do not utter the name of God in public. And so, in this psalm, his name is this one here, the Lord, as it is translated. It's a Yod He Vav He. So, give thanks to Jehovah is essentially the same as kara, or call upon his name. So what we have here really is, well, in our case, an A and a B. The two sentences or two statements really refer to the same thing. And so this word kara, to cry out with a loud voice on the name of Jehovah, really is to point the direction out loud, very audibly, directing everyone's attention to Jehovah. So give thanks, show your gratefulness, and call upon him. And in this case, they are rolling in the Ark of the Covenant, and they are singing this psalm. So think of it that as a background, and they are so happy because finally David managed to move the Ark of the Covenant in accordance to the directives of God, based on the rules that God gave to the Levites to carry this by the poles into Jerusalem to be housed in a temporary tent. That event, 2 Samuel chapter 6, is the background of this psalm. And so they are directing the thanksgiving that it is a great thing that the Ark of the Covenant is coming back to Jerusalem. The next word here is make his deeds known. Also another imperative, make known. Now this word make known is cause to be known in an imperative form. You all cause to be known what? His deeds. His deeds really mean the things that God has done the things that God has done. To who? To the peoples. So this word, the peoples, also need an explanation. The peoples. Direct the thanksgiving to Jehovah by crying out loud in a loud voice the name of God. And as you bring it out loud, it is to make known, cause what he has done to be known among the peoples. Now, this word, the peoples, is very important. This word is Amin. And it comes from the word Am. Am means people, and sometimes Am refers to the Israelites. But in this particular one verse, when it says among the peoples, the word the peoples actually covers everyone. Israel is doing the praising and the thanksgiving. The everyone would be all others. And that means Psalm 105 really has an obligation to the psalmist to utter out whatever God has done to everybody at large. Not just Israel, but everyone within earshot and everyone who can hear the proclamation of the thankfulness or thanksgiving. And by raising up their voice so that everyone will know. The idea here is God, in this case, David is saying, everyone should know what God has done. Everyone, not just Israel. No, what about everyone here? Now, what has God done and what about the things that God has done? So, if you think with me that this has to do with the Ark of the Covenant, I would ask all of us to read 1 Samuel chapters 1 through, I guess you can go all the way through 15 at the time of Saul. But read with particular focus on the Ark of the Covenant. How in the first few chapters the Ark was captured. The high priest died, fell backwards. The Philistines who captured the Ark didn't want it. And so it was moved around. And so think of that as the deeds. That when the Ark of the Covenant was removed from Shiloh, because the first part was in Shiloh, and it was captured by the Philistines when they won the war, they moved it around in the land of the Philistines, and it wouldn't stand. Even the idols, the Dagon of the Philistines, they would fall on its face. And eventually they realized something is really wrong by having the Ark of the Covenant. And so they left it in a cart to be led by an ox to the land of Judah so that they can, well, at least take back the Ark because it's too problematic. Now, these are his deeds, essentially to tell all the peoples that the God of Israel is powerful, the God of Israel is real. The most powerful people of that time in the land, the Philistines, don't want anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant because it is troublesome. It is destroying them, it's hurting them, and they gave it back to the Israelites. Psalm 105, verse 1, at least from the underlying Hebrew, is expressing the praise of what God has done through the Ark of the Covenant. Verse 2. Verse 2 says, sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all his wonders. Now, the first word is Sing to him. Sing to him literally means to sing with your mouth, sing with voice. The second word here is make music. It is not sing praises. And this is via instruments. Now, this is important because at the end of the day, if we're not careful, then we would not capture the entire picture. David is saying, yes, use your voice to sing to God. The other one is to make music. And the idea of make music is, yes, it is to accompany the singing by playing musical instruments. Now, perhaps it is striking with the fingers, using stringed instruments in that sense. Well, I guess in today's terms, you can have the harp, or you can have the guitar, or the whatever the musical instruments that you tend to strike with the fingers on stringed instruments, and that would be to talk about everything of his wonders. Now, this word wonders is really a wonderful word. The wonders here is pala. And these refer to extraordinary events. This refers to things that is very difficult to explain. It is marvelous. It is wonderful. It is extraordinary. It is supernatural. This is that word. Tell of these works that he has done. What about when the Ark of the Covenant was in the possession of the Philistines? What happened? When the Israelites rolled out the Ark of the Covenant, what happened? What happened with the Ark of the Covenant would be the marvelous things, the extraordinary things that you put that into song and play it with your instruments and sing out to God. And the peoples of all other nations will be able to hear and understand that this God of Israel, via the Ark of the Covenant, has made the difference. And even the Philistines and even people like in Jericho would be terrified. Verse 3, boast in his holy name. May the heart of those who seek the Lord be joyful. Now, this word boast really is how should we say, it's to make glory. Make glory, make important. And to praise is one of that, to commend his holy name. Now, holy, remember, this word is special name. It is a one and only name for God. He is the eternal God. He is the who was, who is, and is to come God. His name is Jehovah. And so this word boast is to really make mention in a way where it really highlights the importance of the name of God. Now, to the Israelites, the name of God is something that they know like the back of their hand. When they came out of Egypt, they know who Jehovah is. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh in Exodus chapter 3. And so Jehovah is the name. And they know this by heart, innate in all Israelites who were born. But to people like us today, many of us don't think of the name of God being Jehovah. We have many other words to ascribe to him. But here in Psalm 105, verse 3, this name is Jehovah. It is a special name of God. It's a unique name of God. It says, may the heart, this word, the heart of those who seek the Lord, and the word to seek the Lord is to inquire, to search for God, be glad. May the heart of the person, and this word here, it does refer to the organ and the emotional expression from his mind. May the mind of those who seek the Lord be happy, be joyful. This is a very interesting expression. It is not about pure feelings here. It is about the mind that is thinking about God, the mind who is seeking God, who is inquiring about God, who is looking to God for answers, who is looking to see God in the process of how life is. Now, this is a continuous expression in the minds of the Israelites. And may they who seek God will be happy with what they find. Now we see this in verse 4 as a continuation. He says, seek the Lord and his strength, seek his face continually. Now this second word, seek, is also in the imperative, is to consult God, it is to investigate God, it is to study about God, which is different from this word seek here. It's a different word altogether. It's to consult God and his strength. And both of these refer to the Torah of God, where to derive strength from God is not an abstract thing. In the minds of David and his compatriots and the Israelites, the strength of God is found in the commands of God, and as such in the Torah of God. Now, in this case, seek is to inquire, which is the same as this word here. Seek his face continually, and this is good. The idea here is to continue, and you need to remember that it is not a one-time thing. And so this shows us that in this psalm, David is suggesting that the engagement with God is continuous. It is an ongoing process. It's something that you will continually search God. Seek his face is actually the Hebrew word. Seeking his face is to look for his approval in whatever you do. In seeking for his guidance in whatever you do. In seeking for wisdom in whatever you do. And that continually suggests that every day of your life, you are not living alone. And the psalm encourages, as David is suggesting, this engagement with God is not a one-time affair. And as a person does that, then a person will continually be engaged with the mind of God. Verse 5. Verse 5 says, remember his wonders. Now remember, this word wonders are all the miraculous events. These things here, wonders, which he has done. The intent is to bring to mind all the things that God has done with regards to the Ark of the Covenant, as he uses the Ark to lead the people, to fight with the people, and to be lost by the people. But they were wonders that God did, wonders that cannot be explained. And he says, bring to mind, remember them. Don't forget what God has done in his miraculous works. Now, interestingly, you would find that there are not a lot of things that God has done But the things when God has done it is recorded in the scripture for us, that they are beyond words to explain. You know, crossing the Red Sea with the manna, water coming out from the rock, seeing God at Mount Sinai, and then crossing the Jordan, bringing the ark out, defeating Jericho, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of things that God has done. And so God only does that once. And God says, remember, bring to mind always his marvels, the judgments as spoken by his mouth. We need to remember his marvels. The word marvels here is the things that, I guess you can say the miracles. The miracles, the sign, the spectacular signs that he has indicated. Now, judgments here would be justice. The justice that he has spoken by his mouth. Basically, we are seeing that David is declaring God as a God of wonders, a God who does things that cannot be explained, a God who uses miracles to send a message, the God who provides justice to all that is done and judged. That is his character. And it is all coming by his mouth. He spoke it and it happened. He told Moses to do it and it happened. And so all these things, David is telling the people to recount, to remember. Verse 6, you, descendants of Abraham, his servant, you, sons of Jacob, his chosen ones. If you think about it, this word is Zerah. It means you, seed of Abraham, his servant. Now, this word servant is avad. Please bear in mind the same word servant is translated as servant. It can be translated as slave or a bond servant. It really depends on the context that is used. Then it says, you sons of Jacob. Then you find that descendants of Abraham and sons of Jacob, we have here an A and a B. This is an A, this is a B. Descendants of Abraham, sons of Jacob, they are from the same family. The first expression is, it is his servant, God's servant. The second one, sons of Jacob, his chosen ones. Now, this word chosen in Hebrew means selected. Selected out of many. And so chosen would be to suggest that God has looked at various options of the descendants of Abraham, because Abraham had many descendants. Abraham had the descendants from Esau. Abraham may have spoken to Esau before, and the descendants of Esau would not have this. And so God was looking around and in the early days to see who he can work with, but the descendants of Abraham finally God landed on would be the descendants of Jacob. It's not Jacob himself, but the descendants of Jacob, meaning the descendants of Abraham. The descendants of Jacob, or in another name that he has, is Israel. Then you know that Israel is God's servant. Israel is God's chosen one. And David declares about God, he is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. And this is important. Very often you find the Hebrew word, Ani Yehovah, which we have seen in the book of Leviticus. I am the Lord. Here is He is Jehovah. So this word here is who? Jehovah. And Eloheinu. The idea here is he is Jehovah, our Elohim. Otherwise, in the book of Leviticus, you keep listening and hearing God saying, Ani Jehovah Elohim, meaning I am Jehovah, your Elohim. And what David is basically declaring is, in the same vein, Jehovah, we're talking about the same Jehovah. He is Jehovah, our Elohim. His judgments are in all the earth. Now, this word judgments here is justice. The way he does and he wants justice to be done is found in all the land. And oftentimes it can be extrapolated that the justice of God is also seen in the other peoples. Like in verse 1, declare the thanksgiving, call upon the name of Jehovah, and make it known to all the peoples. And so the justice of God can be seen in all the peoples. Verse 8, he has remembered his covenant for olam, for a long, long time. The word which he commanded to 1,000 generations. And so this is another A and a B. Forever is 1,000 generations. For a long time. I guess in the Chinese language, we would say 1,000 generations or 10,000s of years. Now, this idea here of his covenant is the word which he commanded. The word which he commanded is covenant, berit, which is translated as covenant. And this is about Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. However, I think we need to use this to help us understand what is covenant. Covenant is a formal promise, something that he had declared that he will do. So the word which he commanded is really his covenant. That is what it means. And he will always remember his words that he promised. And so David is singing the praises of God, that God is not going to forget his covenant. Now, verse 9 and 10 goes together. It says, which he made with Abraham, his oath to Isaac. Then he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. So this everlasting covenant is brought into an olam covenant. And we need then to remember where all these were. With Abraham, you would find that this was first cut in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 to 16. When Isaac came about, you would see this reminded in Genesis chapter 26, verses 3 to 4. And then when Jacob came about, you find that God spoke to him, and you find this in Genesis chapter 28, verses 3 to 4. God did this 3 times. First in 15, then in 26, then in 28, by saying that he made. Now, this word made does not exist, by the way. This should say cut. And in Genesis 15, it would be the berit that would cut the animals into 2 halves, and God will walk through the middle of the animals that were cut into 2, and thereby confirm the berit. And that same berit was mentioned again to Isaac and then to Jacob, that their descendants will return to this land and they would inherit the land. And so this is the fact that God remembered the covenant, brought them back into the promised land, conquered the promised land through Joshua. And then after that, in the book of First Samuel, we had kings, Saul, and then in Second Samuel, we have David in the early part of Second Samuel, and then we have Solomon in the later part of Second Samuel. So all of this is that David is duly reminded the fact that they have the kingdom is because God made the promise to Abraham. Verse 11. This promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is expressed in verse 11. To you, I will give the land of Canaan as a portion of your inheritance. God says he will give the land of Canaan as the portion of your inheritance. This idea of your inheritance would be to Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. And this psalm is to relate how all this happened with the land of Canaan, which now is the kingdom of David. Now, you just think with me, there have been many years since the Exodus. And yet every year they will remember the Exodus at the Pesach, the feast of Matzah. And David would also be one to recount that. And now that he has become king and he is bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, it has dawned on him that God has finally found the place that he had bought the land. But it was not upon him to build the temple, obviously, in 2 Samuel chapter 7. But here he celebrates God, that he is a faithful God. When he said he gives the land to Abraham, his descendant reiterated to Isaac and to Jacob, and then Jacob's sons came and conquered and took the inheritance. And he is duly reminded that when they were only a few people in number, well, Abraham had 300 servants, but very few in his family. He was trying to have one son, and that was even very difficult to get. First, he had to have Hagar, and then he had Ishmael. No, but God says you are going to have a son out of your own loin, and then he actually had Isaac. But they were small in family. And then Isaac had Rebecca as a wife, and she had a pair of twins. So 2 sons. Very few. And they were ger. This word is important. They were a ger in Canaan. Because the land didn't belong to them, they were a visitor. They were a stranger in the land of Canaan. Later, they would be a stranger in the land of Egypt, not belonging to them, but they had to live there and abide by the rules of the land. In verse 13, it says they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people. Again, you see this as an A and a B. Interestingly, you find that they moved from the land of the Hittites and then to the land of the Philistines, and they moved back and forth. They went to fight in the northern area. There were kings in Sodom, Gomorrah, and a number of the Amorites were there. And so they moved around here and there. From one kingdom to another people. They were just moving around because they were strangers. It was the land that God wanted to show Abraham that this is what I will give to your descendants. It is quite interesting to find that when Abraham came in, he never got the land. It was through the descendants, and they got the land. And so David is celebrating the fact that the ark is now in the kingdom of David in Jerusalem. Verse 14, he allowed no one to oppress them. He rebuked kings for their sakes, saying, do not touch my anointed ones, do not harm my prophets. And let me explain this. This in itself is important for us to understand. God did not allow anyone to harm them. Remember, them is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God miraculously protected them. Now, they knew about this, and they would have the book of Genesis in their possession, part of the Torah. God has done all these work, and so make known these deeds to the people. He rebuked kings for their sakes. You'd find in, I guess you would find in Genesis chapter 12, and then you find in verse 17, Pharaoh was rebuked by God. And then you would find that in Genesis chapter 20 and in verse 3, that Avimelech, the Philistine king, was warned by God. And then you find in Genesis chapter 31 and in verse 24, Laban was warned, don't touch Jacob. And so all of them had these episodes that God intervened. Now, in these cases, you find that it's not a natural event. God appeared in their dreams. Don't touch Sarah. Don't hurt them. Don't cheat them. Don't. God gets involved. And they are told, these are my anointed ones and they are my prophets. An A and a B. God says, don't touch, don't harm my anointed ones. Now, you notice that they were not anointed in the sense of pouring oil over their heads, but they are called God's anointed because God had chosen them and protected them and used them for his purposes. And so in this sense, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were God's anointed. They were also called my prophets because you find that they have the authority to talk about the future. For example, in Genesis 50, in the blessings of his children, Jacob said a number of things. Then in Isaac, where he had Rebekah having the twins, there were a number of things that God had revealed to them. Then with Abraham, God had revealed that he would be a mighty nation, a nation with a great name. He would have a great name, and he would be a blessing to all the families of the earth, and so on and so forth. So all of these are said to be my prophets because they spoke for God. They represented the voice of God. Not because they had a lot of prophecies to make, but because in their course of life, God used them to become a rebuker of the nations around them. First, to the 5 kings of the north in Genesis chapter 13 and 14, to rescue Lot, to fight for the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they had that ability because in those early days, they were really the chieftains of their day. And even though they were small in number, they were able to rebuke Shechem and his family for raping Dinah. And so all the events that happened, they had been accorded the respect from the Hittites when Abraham went to buy Machpelah, a place to bury Sarah, and paid the money in front of all the witnesses and engaged with the Hittites to buy their land. So all of these events are things that were recorded in the book of Genesis. And David here inserts them into the psalm, and he gives God the glory. He gives God the praise. So notice it is not about his daily lives. There's nothing about the daily life of David that he talks about. He doesn't talk about how he was protected from Saul, who tried to kill him. But nevertheless, he recounts the deeds of God, as in verse 1 and 2 says, that what God has done in the past, things that is miraculous, things that is wonderful, things that is difficult to express, things that is of justice of God, and tell the nations this is what happened. This is the God of Israel, the just and living God. Now, we stopped here in verse 15 and we will continue tomorrow. And this leads us to the end of our session today.